I'm kind of gambling on most of you being gleefully drunk on nostalgia just from this colour scheme, but for Zoomers, hi, this is a Blockbuster. From 1985 to 2014, asterisk, we'll get into it. Blockbuster was the biggest name in movie rental. Blockbuster was how you saw movies at home. They were basically an empire, a huge industry. They set records, they redefined how rental worked, and then they nosedived. They're basically gone now. It might seem hard to believe, but for a long time, this little yellow and blue symbol here had people slavishly devoted. Just the sight of that blue and yellow together had nations handing over billions of dollars. And then they dropped it like they just lost interest. It's impossible to think of anything like that happening nowadays, of course. But though the stores may be gone, the legacy of Blockbuster is still there. Whether it's in the number of movies that reference Blockbuster or the TV shows based on it, and that legacy is there in even more obscure ways that you might not know about. For instance, massive YouTube stars and soulless cash grabbers, the Fine Bros, originally named their channel after the exorbitant late fees that they gleefully inflicted on customers and then pocketed fraudulently. That's probably true. It is a big story and I'm going to tell it. Now, first off, forgive the odd setup here, you know, the lack of carpet. I haven't finished laying the groundwork, yeah? In fact, the fourth wall over there, it's not super firm at the moment. It's early days because I haven't finished establishing the premises here in this Blockbuster store that I'm in. But while I'm here, my main goal is to answer the big question. Who or what killed Blockbuster? How did an empire of over 9,000 stores crash and burn? You probably have an answer coming to mind, I know. Most people will go with the common thing. The popular consensus is that Netflix won out. That's why there's no Blockbuster. It's just technical innovation, baby. Onwards and upwards, the march of progress rolls on, and Whig historians down another pint in victory.
This calls for another drink.
No, not so much. The actual history of Blockbuster and her inglorious end is a heck of a lot more complex than a simple word beginning with N. And it's going to take me 6 relatively concise episodes to cover everything that you need to know, including the economic and cultural aspects that I find the most interesting in all of this. And throughout this whole project, I'm going to be a little like a Rod Serling, an Elvira, or another horror host. And yes, there's another part that goes in with every episode. I will cover that later, but for now, I should probably say horror hosts. What they?
This is a series for the storyteller, because it's our thinking that an audience will always sit still and listen and watch a well-told story.
If that is confusing and you are wondering what a horror host is, have you seen Fright Night? Not the 2011 one with David Tennant and Colin Farrell. No, that's the remake. I mean the original. That Fright Night, this Fright Night, is from 1985, written and directed by Tom Holland. Not the scrumptious twink who plays Spider-Man, it's another one. But one of the pivotal characters in this is a horror host. He has his own show, that's the eponymous Fright Night, and he's got a humble but nevertheless endearing set and a cheesy introduction for the movie of the week. That's a hell of a premise, you know, with broad appeal today, right? Like everyone wants that. No?
Stop!
Okay, I am weirdly nostalgic for horror hosts, even though it's something that I never really experienced directly because it's far more of an American thing. But I think it's kind of cool, to be honest. I really like the horror host phenomenon. As goofy as it can be, I'm into it. In Britain, the closest that we really got to that is film critic Mark Kermode introducing his Channel 4 Extreme Cinema season in the early 2000s. I am old, guys, I'm old. I see horror hosts as this genre-specific offshoot of an established theatrical tradition, the MC. If you don't know it, the MC, the Master of Ceremonies, is this figurehead who is there to introduce all the disparate acts that are going to be in the variety show and sort of top and tail them and Give them a sense of consistency, make them feel like they all belong together. And as TV overtakes theatre and becomes far more prominent, that role finds itself expressed in, say, people like Rod Serling with The Twilight Zone, or the horror hosts that start arriving in the early 1950s to late 1950s. Essentially, you never knew where the week's story was going to be set, whether it was going to be scary, saucy, thrilling, but it wouldn't feel weird because you knew Alfred Hitchcock was going to be there to introduce them, to top and tail the episode, and it would feel like it was part of a coherent whole. The hosts, they provide this sort of comforting sense of continuity, and they create their own vibe, they bring their own gimmicks. Your early horror hosts, they aren't big names, they don't have a big budget. On local channels, they might even be the local weatherman doing double duty. Even, say, the pioneers, you know, the original horror host, Maya Nomi. She had occasional roles in Broadway, often in chorus, but otherwise she was working as a hat check girl on Sunset Strip when she was hired to be Vampira in 1954. What I'm trying to get across here is it's niche, it's low budget when it starts off, but the horror hosts, they become impactful because people really like them. Much later on, skipping the 1960s and 70s stuff like Thriller and Tales of the Unexpected, you have Tales from the Crypt, which has the animatronic Crypt Keeper, and he's basically doing the horror host function. Not strictly the same, because if we're going to be pedantic, the horror host should be entirely separate to the story being introduced, should be entirely outside of it, whereas the Crypt Keeper is part of the show and still introducing the story in his own inimicable fashion. But that is nitpicking. The Crypt Keeper is very much still a horror host, more like Rod Serling, if Rod Serling had been reanimated with a reagent made of nitrous oxide and Viz magazine. But moving on.
But first I've got a tawdry tale of my own to tell.
Peter Vincent in Fright Night is a milder version of all that, much more mild than the Crypt Keeper, I have to say. Much closer to 1950s horror hosts like Chilly Billy, Sinister Seymour, Guladi and Vincent Price. Honestly, I just wish more people watched the 1985 Fright Night. I think they would adore it. If you really like Stranger Things, for instance, you like the 1980s vibe of that show, you would definitely get on with Fright Night. Now, I know other movies had their influence on that series, you know, Stand By Me, Firestarter, Sarlo, E.T., but Fright Night has a huge amount in common with it. It's got the horror aspect and also a really nice knowing humour.
I am Peter Vincent, Vampire Killer.
There's a really great bit in Fright Night where the horror host Peter Vincent is talking to the protagonist Billy, and he's complaining about the contemporary mass-produced slasher films.
I have just been fired because nobody wants to see vampire killers anymore, or vampires either. Apparently all they want are demented madmen running around in ski masks, hacking up young virgins.
He's kind of obviously taking a jab at Friday the 13th, which at that point in 1985 was on its 5th film in 6 years. Yeah.
Now, if you would excuse me.
If I'm honest, I think some of the fondness that I feel for Fright Night stems from being able to relate to Peter Vincent's feeling of being totally out of touch with the current thing. I remember the golden years of video rental. It's, you know, that's a topic for another night, but there is something about visiting a Blockbuster store that streaming services just can't replace.
Video store
Welcome to Blockbuster Video.
is popping up all over the country. There's one near you.
Blockbuster Video.
And there's a tribute aspect to it as well. I mean, Fright Night is an excellent little coming-of-age story, a Bildungsroman with character growth, but what really endears it to me, if I'm honest, is that it has this feeling of being a loving tribute to horror movies. The protagonist, Billy, is this kind of goofy, kind of awkward, very relatable kid who's out of touch with the modern world a little bit, but really loves horror movies. As I said, very relatable. He takes them seriously, and that sincerity causes him some problems, and he's mocked for it.
About believing in vampires.
What about it?
Were you serious?
But that sincerity is really endearing to me. With Generation X gaining prominence and influence on the culture, you see a massive increase in deconstructionism and postmodernism. Sincerity really has been replaced by cynicism and snark, and that can be fun, but it's also quite empty too. It leaves you with a situation where there is lots that you laugh at, but nothing you really love. And I think that's what was at the heart of Peter Vincent's criticism of generic slashers and Fright Night's emphasis on conviction regardless of the rest of the world. Like Peter and Billy, I am very much out of step with the modern world, and this whole project, it's going to be very different. It is going to be ambitious, it's going to be weird, and it is going to risk being cringe. And that's okay, because throughout it is going to be a sincere attempt to talk about something that I find interesting and impactful. And it's probably not going to go where you expect it to. But that can wait now. It's pretty quiet here, and quite frankly, I'm fired up to talk about Fright Night more. After every episode, every night shift here in this Blockbuster store that I work at, I'll be following the talk of Blockbuster's history with a movie discussion, a commentary, talking over an entire film. They might be related, they might not. I just think they're going to be interesting, and me acting like a horror host there, it's just because I find it fun, to be honest. I hope you'll enjoy it too. So, serious Blockbuster history starts next week. Right now, I'm going to go to the staff room, fire at Fright Night, and talk all the way over it. And I hope you'll grab a drink and join me. I think it's time. Get yourself a drink. Join me in the staff room. Fright Night is excellent. And there's a heck of a lot to say about it. Good night.
This is a series for the storyteller, because it's our thinking that an audience will always sit still and listen and watch a well-told story. And now that I've immodestly gone on record predicting the high quality of this series, let me very briefly show you what we mean by a special kind of series.